Hi, everyone. Thanks for waiting. We were just both dealing with some setup issues. I'm back home in Mexico, thank God. And Mary Lou is, as always, in New Mexico, and she has a new mic, and it sounds awesome. How are you doing, Mary Lou?
I'm good. I got past all my technophobia and set up the new mic. It is so windy here. We have like 80 mile an hour winds. That's what you're hearing is the cooling unit on the top of my building might blow off while we're talking. So that's the sound.
It's so loud. Holy shit.
Crazy. Yeah, it's nuts out there. Like garbage cans are blowing down the streets. Pieces of people's fences are blowing down the street. It's very, very windy here right
now. Really?
Yes, it's very windy.
Holy cow. Well, I hope that the power stays on.
I think I probably will.
This is when it gets windy like that here, the power is like gonna go out.
Yeah, it might go out. It might go out. It's very, very windy, but we deal with wind here, so hopefully it'll be all right. It's just really loud. I don't think it's been this loud for a while.
Yeah, I can't believe that. Yeah. Welcome everyone to Where Are All the Women? We're here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern to represent the women that the men forgot. And no matter how much we complain about it, I feel like they just keep forgetting more and more.
They do.
It's making me even more annoying because it just makes me complain more.
Well, yeah, where all the childless women is something that came up this week. That's a new group to scapegoat. I hadn't seen that. That all of trans activism is your fault.
It's so weird because they keep just coming up with new theories to blame women for everything that's going wrong in Western society and culture. And I feel like it's contradictory to their efforts and arguments around saving and preserving Western culture, because Western liberalism is so great, and which is true, like I think that the West, I think that America is a great country. I think that Canada was at one point a great country before descending into communism. But like, it's, I feel like those guys, the heterodox type guys, argue against, mass immigration for good reason, and argue against open borders, and argue against, allowing jihadis to take over and destroy the West. But, I think one of the good things about the West and Western culture is, liberalism and, what feminism achieved during the first and second waves, not necessarily during the third wave.
Right.
Things like gay rights and things like that. And now it's like, what they're doing, I think, is looking for reasons to put women back in the kitchen, essentially. And not that women shouldn't be in the kitchen. The kitchen's a wonderful place for women to be if they like cooking. But like what happened was, I guess this has been going on since April and I missed it the first time around. I think, it's an argument that's been advanced primarily by Jordan Peterson, but other men have been talking about this as well. And it's not like, in theory, the theory could sort of make sense. It's just that in reality, it's not the case. And so the argument goes, childless women, it's like this innate feminine instinct to be nurturing, which I think in a broad way probably is true. It doesn't apply to all individual women, but I'm sure there are evolutionary and biological reasons for women to be nurturing, namely taking care of kids. Like that makes sense. I don't particularly have a super nurturing instinct. I'm also not a particularly feminine woman. But because women are, not having kids as they should be. They should all be getting married and becoming mothers, yada, yada, yada. And they aren't. So they have this like misplaced feminine instinct, i.e. they have nowhere to put their need to nurture because they don't have a kid. So they want to nurture whoever is deemed oppressed or marginalized, in this case, men with fetishes, autogonophiles, and Hamas, terrorist groups.
Right. I don't know how Margaret Thatcher fits into Jordan Peterson's theory. I wonder about that.
Was she childless?
Wasn't she childless? I thought she was childless.
You're probably right. I don't know. I actually don't know that much about Margaret Thatcher because for most of my life I was told and believed that she was evil, so I didn't look into her very much.
I know, I'm rethinking everything. I'm like, was Ronald Reagan really terrible? I need to go back and see. I think she was childless. She was not known for being a bleeding heart, overly nurturing person. Oh, she had children.
No, not at all. I think she was.
Okay, maybe because she had children. These men they want to blame everything on women. Like, women are not responsible for male sexual perversion. These autogynephiles who are wanting to be in women's spaces and wanting to perform their fetish in public and insisting everyone conform to their linguistic demands are not the fault of women. This is a male sexual perversion that, again, existed in a documented way since the Roman Empire. Was Nero's perversion the fault of the childless women at the time?
I mean, I don't think, I think you're right that obviously the root of transgenderism is in male, sexual fantasies and male desires and male, like, general weirdness. I don't know why men are so much weirder than women are, but maybe women have to be more stable because they're the ones who have to be there for their kids, and so men are free to act like, perverts and psychos. They don't have to be quite as responsible with their behaviors. But like, it's not like, it's very true that women have supported the trans trend, and it's been one of the weird and more maddening and more disappointing things about this whole situation is these like progressive women who probably consider themselves feminist, who are, have thrown women as a group under the bus to support these male narcissists. And it is, particularly, I think, young women who've gone along with this. So yeah, maybe a lot of them are childless. They're like college age. We see a lot of these women, rooting for Hamas and, advocating trans activism and so on and so forth. But it's that I don't think that the theory about childlessness makes any sense. Partly because, as I pointed out in my very, very long essay that I wrote on Substack about this, that I also added, I sort of intended to write about Sundress Gate, but I also decided to add in this argument around childless women being to blame for the trans trend and transanity. But like the women who were on top of this from the get-go and held the line and who said trans women are men over and over and over and over until finally that phrase became mainstreamed, as though that's a controversial thing to say, right. Allowing these guys to say out loud, trans women are men, allowing other people to say trans women are men, because all these radical feminists and these lesbian feminists and these like separatists and like, right. And I'm not a radical feminist. I don't even particularly like radical feminism that much. But what I learned about transgenderism and criticisms of transgenderism and the need to protect women-only space from radical feminists, because they were the only ones talking about this.
Right. I still believe the radical feminist analysis on transgenderism is the best analysis. I do. I just think that they had it right from the beginning. And you're right. It's so windy. I feel like my building's going to blow down. Yeah.
What is the radical feminist analysis of transgenderism for people who don't know? I mean, part of the problem is that people don't understand what radical feminism is and what a radical feminist is, because you say radical feminist and they think of trans activists because they think radical just means crazy or like extremist. So they're like, these like rabid, crazy, like blue-haired feminists who are they, thems, and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, you know, those of us who've been, you know, enmeshed in feminism and these debates for decades know those women to be, you know, third wave so-called feminists who aren't really feminists at all, or, you know, some version of an activist, you know.
Right. I think that, well, yeah, I'm on the spot now, but the radical feminist analysis of gender is that gender is a synonym for sex role stereotypes. And that identifying with sexual stereotypes does not define your maleness or femaleness, and nor should it. And that sexual stereotypes should be, you know, eliminated as much as possible, and certainly not codified into law as the definition of male and female. Where the conservative critique of transgenderism believes in this concept of femininity means wearing sundresses and being super nurturing, and women just need to get in their role. And that actually is going to create, in my opinion, more transgenderism in the little tomboys, right? Who don't identify with that.
Right.
And then the other piece of the radical feminist analysis is that much of male, like the men who say they're women, are very frequently autogynephilic men who hate women, who objectify women, who are performing a sexual fetish, and that this has nothing to do with human rights. This is whether or not we're all going to be forced to go along with this kink in public.
These are the kind of guys who think that being a woman means wearing like a sexy sundress.
Right, exactly. Make a sandwich. And right. So I do still think that's the best analysis of, like, there are, you know, sex is a biological categorization. We are a sexually dimorphic species. Within male and female, we see a lot of different behavior, but none of that behavior is what determines whether or not you're male or female. So,
yeah. Okay. Thank you for explaining all that. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that has made everyone really confused is the conflation of sex and gender. And radical feminists are, like you say, the ones who point out that gender, I mean, I've always described gender really just as like personality, likes, dislikes. So to me, it's sort of a pointless word. I'd rather just say personality, you know, and it's not to say that, again, that there aren't evolutionary traits, you know, patterns of behavior, desires, affinities, skill sets, and so on and so forth that women are more likely to have, or men are more likely to have, for obvious reasons, because we've evolved into different roles, and physically we're very different and we have different capabilities. But, you know, yeah, like it's weird to start sort of enforcing these stereotypes as though this is like necessarily the best way to be. I think for a lot of women, those stereotypes do apply. I think a lot of women are more invested in getting along and going along and cooperating and not causing conflict, and you know, being passive, maybe, and definitely being more empathetic. So sort of being more aware of other people's feelings and how they might be making other people feel. And those qualities are not necessarily all bad. And, you know, and it does make women prone to want to support the marginalized or the oppressed, right?
Nice. Right. I don't know how much is innate, you know, just as a midwife, I look at other species and think no one views a mother bear as, when I think feminine, female mothering behavior, you know, I think of like, well, what are other mammals doing versus what we've been socialized into? Who knows? Who knows any of it? All I know is, yes, it's it's frustrating and mind-boggling the number of women who've gone along with this horrible phenomenon of transgenderism. And it's not women's fault at the root. Like, this thing has the backing of big pharma and Hollywood and now the US military and a lot of very wealthy autogynephilic men. This isn't a female created movement. Women have been the foot soldiers in it far too frequently, and that is really frustrating.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it's just interesting that these guys who are, who they didn't know that all this was going on because they had rejected feminism and feminists as useless and hysterical and irritating and crazy and all those things. And, a lot of feminism is kind of useless and stupid and hysterical and crazy at this point. But sorry, I'm fiddling with my AC. It's very humid in here now. And, when they did find out about it, they asked, the title of the stream, where are all the women? And then proceeded to decide what was going on without talking to any of those women, without really acknowledging those women, without making an effort to really hear or understand their analysis, but simultaneously repeating the exact things that those women had said. And again, like, that's just, like childless women, I would say, mothers too, of course, like women like you, you've been at this for a long time, and some of the Vancouver rape relief women and so on and so forth. But, I learned about this stuff from Janice Raymond and Sheila Jeffries and Leah Keith. And those women are radical feminist lesbians.
Exactly.
Who were childless.
The majority of the early strongest voices, including Kathy Brennan and Elizabeth Hungerford and Gallus Mag, these were all childless women who were sounding the alarm and making the best arguments and analyses for why this was a bad idea, and who were looking down the road and predicting where this was going to go, and were correct 100% of the time. The vast majority of them were childless.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and I mean, I think that, I'm like really, I'm sick of men telling me, God, now I just sound like I rejected feminism, and now I'm just returning to sounding like an angry, raving feminist again. And I resent that as well. But I was going to say that I resent being told how I should be and what's good for me, and that I'm not really happy when I am happy. And I'm much happier than most women I know, probably most people I know, just because I've, stayed on course and stayed true to myself and made choices that I want to make. And I haven't tried to do the safe or conventional thing, which I think has, I don't know. I don't think you can really be truly happy unless you're really being authentic and true to yourself. And
you're healthy, happy, functional, versus Jordan Peterson, who is a self-declared mentally ill drug addict.
I'm not going to comment on that. But I mean, I appreciate a lot of what Jordan Peterson has to say, and I think that he's a super intelligent man. But I don't, a lot of these guys are totally out to lunch on women, but don't bother to ask women about it. Like a lot of these guys have sort of risen to prominence in large part through fighting the woke stuff, in large part through fighting the transgenderism stuff, and then talk about women amongst themselves and decide what's wrong with us and what we want and what's good for us. I think that there were lots of negative aspects to feminism, and ways that so-called feminism, modern feminism, I should say, really harmed women. But in like really enormous, really important ways, feminism helped a lot of women. And I'm trying to remember how I managed to tie this to Sundress Gate, but essentially it was like, I mean, the sundress debate is whether or not any woman wants to admit it, rooted in the fact that men like sundresses, in my opinion, because they make women look like innocent and girlish, but also sexual and fuckable at the same time. So, I don't know if I'm going to pass judgment on that beyond the fact that I think that men have horrible taste in fashion, because I think that these sundresses, and in any case, the sundress in question is incredibly ugly. It looks like a little girl's dress, but again, like sexualized. It looks like it's very crappily made. It's not flattering. Like it's like, tight around the bodice and the boob, and then fluffs out here and has these like really kind of lacy, stupid, like I would be so humiliated to wear. Like I don't want to dress like a sexy little girl. But also, like it doesn't, like I like things that like show off my butt, like, or like my legs, or like, the parts of your body that have like fat and muscle. So I'm never going to choose a dress that like hides my ass. But, beyond that, I'm like the argument for the sundress tried to be like, this is sort of like a super feminine, like modest, but still like appealing to men thing to wear, as if, I sound like a bit of a broken record on this, but as if women need to try to appeal to men is the other thing. Like, I'm like, what, like, is that hard to get men's attention? You don't really need like a instruction manual. But yeah, It's like, I know that men like these stupid, ugly sundresses. I had a young boyfriend years ago who was like, kept trying to get me to wear a sundress. And I was like, what even are you talking about? Like, what is a sundress? Like, he has some little fantasy of some like silly girl prancing around in a meadow or something like that. It was just like, this is not my vibe. Like, you should go be with whatever this imaginary woman is. Like, but and men trying to convince women that they should be doing things to please them, like as if we have to. Like they act, men. It's men behaving as though they're picky in any way about women. That's the amusing part. That we should do this feminine performance for them so that they like us. No, I'm not going to.
I'm just imagining like you putting some kind of sundress on your merch site now.
Oh God,
no, it's not gonna happen.
No, but I do have my Team Turf shirt on my merch site and my Team Turf mug. My merch, my shop is awesome. It's looking awesome to me. I can't express how thrilled I am that Fourth Wall apparently lets me do whatever I want over there. I should knock on wood in case they change their minds. But
nice. First Amendment, baby. So were we going to talk about the Central Park Karen?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the reason I was surprised to see this Amy Goodman interview with Christian Cooper recently. I was like, why are we revisiting this? But apparently it's because Christian Cooper's on a PR tour for his new book and new TV show, because he's doing very well in life.
He was so injured by the hate crime
and all this racism that's happening to him that he's incredibly successful, and he's being platformed by all these white ladies, despite the fact that white ladies are the worst and super racist.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm no longer surprised by any shilling on the part of the establishment Amy Goodman is doing. I don't know if she was abducted by aliens and replaced with what's that called, a walk-in. That's what people here in New Mexico talk about when you get abducted by aliens and they put an alien inside your body. You're a walk-in now. Or if she just sold out. But what the hell happened to Amy Goodman? This is the woman who was nearly assassinated in East Timor for being a journalist in a totalitarian, she was found out in a totalitarian regime that she was there doing journalism. She used to be brave. She used to actually speak the counter narrative, and now she's just shilling all of this propaganda to the masses.
I never followed Amy Goodman closely enough to know what she was like historically, because I'm Canadian and I was listening to the CBC. Like, my news almost all the news that I got, certainly all the like radio news and TV news I got was from the CBC. I never listened to or watched American news. And yeah, most of what I read would have been in the Canadian media. I never really even paid attention to American politics until basically the Hillary Trump election came around. So like because somebody on Twitter said to me, oh, she's always been like this. And I thought, maybe she has always been like this, because like so many people that I thought were great turned out to be awful. And I just thought they were great because they were saying things that I liked and that matched my politics. I was like, maybe she was always like this, and nothing changed. But
I don't think so. She first came on my radar in the 90s, and she was very, very critical of neoliberalism in the Clinton administration at a time when people were celebrating Clinton and Gore, and Clinton was pushing through NAFTA and GATT and the WTO treaties and all of this, multinational corporate rule that we now live under. And she was covering what looked to me like a grassroots organic movement against that. Like that, it wasn't a time of paid activism. It wasn't a time of getting grants to go protest the WTO. Like people were doing this on their own dime. Like this looked like a grassroots movement to me. And she was critiquing corporate power and critiquing these trade deals that eroded national sovereignty. And now she no longer believes in borders or national sovereignty, right? Which is a coup on the part of the people who just want global corporate rule. She really was harsh on Clinton at a time when the establishment, like he was just a liberal darling. Coming off, the Reagan-Bush years, that was a big deal. This was before George Bush Jr. was our president. I really liked her. Again, I think she was really brave. She spoke out against a lot of things hardly anyone was talking about. In the category of like Chris Hedges, and then something shifted and she started really shilling for the mainstream. When I first noticed it was 2015, she started being very pro-transgenderism and very pro-compulsory vaccination. That was the time that states like New York and California were passing these laws, getting rid of philosophical and religious objection to vaccination for school children. And what's interesting is Maya Dillard Smith was the head of the California ACLU at that time. She was, we all know Maya for speaking out against transgenderism as well. But even though she was a mother who chose to routinely vaccinate her kids, she saw the issue of the state forcing pharmaceuticals on families and not having any exemption process as a huge civil rights violation. So, but Amy Goodman was 100% pro-compulsory vaccination. She was platforming people like Paul Offit, who was saying things like people should have their children taken away from them if they don't give every single vaccine. Paul Offit invented the rotavirus vaccine. He's made, hundreds of millions of dollars off the vaccinations that he's created for illnesses that were considered mild childhood illnesses by my children's pediatrician. They weren't things we were taught to be afraid of 30 years ago. So, and then at the same time, she started really pushing transgenderism. I think in 2016, there was a case where an autogynephilic male who says he's a female went through whatever that scanner they make us go through at the airport, and he was registered as female, and that millimeter wave technology saw something in his crotch, and he got patted down by a male TSA agent. And she ran that story for 2 weeks as though it was the biggest human rights violation in the history of the United States.
Oh my God.
And she used the phrase, her penis. She used the phrase, her penis, over and over and over again, just with the propaganda. So something shifted. And since then, I have really not enjoyed her. She was really pro-COVID authoritarianism. At one point, she was signing off her show saying, remember, wearing a mask, preferably 2 masks, is a sign of love.
Gross.
I know. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, Pushups 2345 says Goodman was a shill for Fidel Castro. She's awful.
Well, maybe That may be true. Maybe she was pushing for other forms of totalitarianism.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, this interview is the first. I haven't paid attention to anything she's done of late, that's for certain. And then I see this clip pop up on Twitter where she's interviewing Christian Cooper, who, of course, was the man who ruined Amy Cooper's life by filming her at the dog park in Central Park. Well, it's a specific part of Central Park where I guess people go bird watching, and it was the early stage of COVID when I think people were really freaked out about everything, including one another. So she was wanting to take her dog out for a walk, who it sounds like this was like a really amazing dog. Like, this certainly was not a dangerous dog. The dog was like a therapy dog and like a work dog, and was like working with autistic kids and going to like the children's hospital and doing like therapy and stuff like that. Like, definitely not a scary, intimidating, dangerous dog.
I know, like the dog had a resume.
Right.
A very accomplished dog that had certifications and a work history. It's a pretty well-trained dog.
Yeah. And so I guess she was sort of, first of all, she was, trying to get him out for some exercise in the dog run, and then be in an area that was away from a lot of people. And she runs into this man, Christian Cooper, essentially alone in the woods, and he starts threatening her dog. She wasn't sure exactly what he was threatening, but what he was saying was threatening. He started filming her and got on her case about leashing the dog, and then took out his dog treats, which he carries around. This is like a thing that he does. This is his shtick. Like, the irony about all of this is that he and everyone else on the internet essentially labeled her a Karen, which is like this like hall monitor, like, I'm going around trying to enforce the rules, I'm calling the manager, which is literally exactly what he was doing. Like, he wasn't, this dog was of no threat to anything or anybody, but he had this vendetta against people who walk their dogs in this area where he liked to watch birds. He's a very unappealing man. Like, his personality is incredibly annoying. He's super uptight. He's just like this bitchy, like man who's obsessed with the rules. And so he goes around trying to catch people breaking the rules and films them and carries around dog treats to threaten them and their dog. I don't think he's ever explained what he's doing with the dog treats. Like, why is he carrying around dog treats and trying to get other people's dogs to come to him? Like, what the hell is that? Like, is he trying to steal their dog?
Exactly. Or is he trying to poison their dog? Who knows? If you encounter this strange man in the woods where no one's around and he is trying to feed your dog something, and he had a history of being known as a difficult person, being a jerk. Multiple other people had gotten into confrontations with him over the same issue.
Including men. Like, I think that things got physical with him and at least one other man in a similar situation.
A black man who was walking his dog off the leash, and Christian Cooper pulled exactly the same trick on him. This is on Barry Weiss's podcast about this incident. And that man actually got in a physical altercation, with him. And then Christian Cooper asked someone who was a bystander to call the police on that black man.
I'm spitting all over my laptop here.
Right.
I mean, I know the other funny thing about all of this, because the narrative instantly went, okay, so Amy Cooper calls the cops. She's clearly terrified. She's getting hysterical. The person on the other end of the line can't hear her, so she's getting more and more hysterical because she thinks she's in danger. And the woman on the other end of the line is saying, I can't hear you. I can't understand you. And she's saying, there's a man who's threatening me and my dog. I'm in, what was the area?
The Ramble.
Thanks.
Which is part of Central Park that's very remote and very like you'd never know you were in the city if you were in there. It's very wild looking, and
it used to be where gay men went to cruise for gay men and had sex in the woods because it was remote, I guess.
Right.
And she's also saying, she's sort of alternating between saying it's an African American man and sometimes just saying it's a man. I'm assuming that she's just trying to describe the man that's threatening her. Even if she were racist, I mean, that's just not an issue to me at all. And I'm not, like she wasn't trying to get, she was scared. She was genuinely scared.
He is a large man. He's tall, he's big. She's in a secluded place where there's nobody around to come help her if something goes wrong with this guy. Here we have like the man versus bear situation, right? She's in the woods.
Right.
She encounters a strange man who's threatening. And he says to her, if you're going to do what you want, I'm going to do what I want, and you're not going to like it, which could be construed by most women as a rape threat.
And she's said many times she was sexually assaulted, I think, in college, and so she was traumatized by that, and that was triggering her in that particular way. But
I think that would trigger any woman.
Yeah, I think so too.
We're all aware that rape is a possibility in our lives. That's just something that comes with being female, and here's a man saying, I'm going to do whatever I want and you're not going to like it, is an incredibly threatening thing to say to a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, and he's filming her, and, as soon as he starts filming, he sort of changes his threatening demeanor to this like victim behavior where he's acting like he's meek and scared and, like, ma'am, like, please don't do this. Like, ma'am, please stop. And, pretending as though he wasn't earlier very obviously threatening to her, and that it isn't obvious to anybody like with, a conscience or an ability to empathize with other people that this would be a scary situation for a woman. And, he turned this all into a race thing. Like he did that. And I think those are his politics prior, and he's grifting on that now. Like all of his new birding grift is all around race and pretending that getting out into nature is a race issue and people of color are somehow being kept out of birding and enjoying nature because of racism, which I think is quite hilarious. I don't know that, people of color are clamoring to get into birding and feel excluded on account of their race. But like his new book that he's now doing the rounds promoting is called Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World. And I listened to it. I listened to the Amy Goodman interview with him, but I also listened to an interview that he did for The Guardian. And both of them, Amy Goodman and whoever the interview was on the Guardian podcast, introduced the subject. So Amy Goodman goes, essentially, this is a significant because this happened, this Central Park Karen story, this Amy Goodman, Christian Cooper situation happened on the same day that George Floyd was murdered. Right. That's what she said, the same day George Floyd was murdered. And I was under the impression that George Floyd was not murdered and that he died because of a drug overdose or something, like he had fentanyl in his system or something like that.
He had fentanyl in his system. He was
like, wasn't it determined that it wasn't a murder? Did I by a number of people?
No, I think the courts have determined it's a murder, and it's, I think it certainly looked like police brutality. I think that it's pretty clear that whether or not he died of a fentanyl overdose, the cop shouldn't have kneeled on his neck for that long, which it's a really upsetting thing to listen to and watch. And I agree that the cop shouldn't have kneeled on his neck like that for so long. But I thought that there was evidence after the fact, like sort of in the past year or something, that came out to show that
it was likely that he died because he had a bunch of fentanyl and drugs and things in his system.
He also tested positive for COVID, which is really fascinating because at the time,
he died of COVID then.
Everybody who was testing positive for COVID who died was considered a COVID death, including like a teenager in Illinois who was literally decapitated in a car accident, a horrific accident. The child died of decapitation, but it was listed as a COVID death. But that wasn't useful for the George Floyd situation to say that he died of COVID. So it was a mess. It happened on this day of filmed incident of egregious police brutality, to say the least, right?
Well, I mean, the whole narrative was bullshit. The whole narrative around what happened was bullshit. It ruined her life. She's still in hiding, as far as I know. As of November, she was still in hiding. She can't get a job in her field. She's been suicidal.
Her dog was taken away from her by the state, and she was charged briefly with attempted murder, right?
Was she?
I think.
I think they were going to charge her with filing a false police report, and then they dropped it.
But they took her dog away from her.
Did they ever give the dog back?
I don't know. She's still in hiding.
But yeah, like it's really ruined her life in huge ways. She got like horrific threats. People told her they hoped that she got raped in prison and that she should kill herself and all of this stuff. And it's so interesting because the same people, the Amy Goodman people, these are all people who would have been really into Me Too, I think, and yet have zero interest in Amy Cooper's side of the story, how she felt, her history, what this guy was doing, because he's Black and because he presented this narrative. And then, this was basically a good sell for the media cycle, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Like this kind of controversy and conflict offers them a lot of content that will keep people clicking and watching and sharing and keep people angry and up in arms, which is really good for them and really good for their bottom line, essentially.
And it continues to feed this false narrative that Black people are more likely to be killed by the cops in the United States than white people too, like that narrative, which that it ties into, it's really important for people to look at Roland Fryer's work, who is an economist at Harvard, who is Black, who did a study on police brutality and found that there's actually no difference in police murder rates between whites and Blacks in the United States. There's a higher rate of physical altercation with the police with African Americans compared to other races, but Black people are not actually more likely to be murdered by the police than any other group of people in the United States. But when you ask liberal Americans, especially during the summer of 2020, when the Black Lives Matter riots were happening, how many police murders there had been against African American men, people were grossly overestimating, thinking that tens of thousands of African American men had been killed by the police in the United States over the past year. And it's completely false. In the same way that the majority of registered Democrats believed they had a 50% chance of dying of COVID if they got COVID, which is, even if you were over 85, you had at most a 15% chance of dying of COVID, which, that's high, but you're also over 85. Your odds of dying from anything are pretty high at that age. But people were so brainwashed by these propaganda campaigns that they grossly overestimated what the actual risk of calling the cops on a Black man is, right? And then the messaging to women is, you can't protect yourself. You can't seek help from the police if a Black man is threatening to rape you in the woods.
Mm-hmm. And yeah. And when you tell people that, like, I remember telling people that, like, I was like, I think that the data shows, this was a few years ago, that, Black men are no more likely to be subject to police brutality or murder than white men are. And people just didn't believe me.
No.
at all. They're like, how could you think that or say that? That can't possibly be true. Of course, because they're hearing this repeated over and over and over in their social media feeds and in the media.
Yeah. Absolutely. And they don't hear about the white men being killed by the police because it's not politically useful for the narrative. But there was a man in Texas who was killed by the police, a white man in Texas. I think his name was Timothy Timba. And he was killed in a very similar way to George Floyd by a police officer kneeling on his neck and asphyxiating him. And no one knows about it. And there were no riots, and there was no, I don't think the cop even went to jail, let alone, like, the cop was probably investigated somewhat, because every time there's a death in police custody, that there's investigation. But that narrative that there's this rampant murder of African-American men by the police is completely false.
Right. And so the narrative was just by Amy Cooper calling the police on Christian Cooper, she was trying to murder him. That was what was said by all of these media outlets and these progressive activists and Black Lives Matter people. Nessa Pearl in the comments is saying, calling the cops with the intention of creating a violent confrontation is, but I have no idea why anyone would think that Amy Cooper was calling the cops with the intention of creating a violent confrontation when she was clearly, or at least we should assume that she was calling the cops because she was scared and wanted protection from violence herself.
Exactly. And people say the fact that she called him an African-American man, which is an accurate description and not a slur. She didn't use a racial slur against him. She said he was an African-American man. They're saying that's evidence of her racism. But Christian Cooper called her a Karen, which is a sexist, racist slur against white women.
Right.
It is a racial slur.
And it's what he was doing. Like, she was just walking her dog, guy, and you came up and started policing her and, harassing her because she wasn't following the rules, and you've elected yourself, hall monitor for Central Park and enforcer of the rules. And he had been advocating to get more police presence in Central Park. So the idea that he was scared of the cops, or, in the name of the Christian Coopers of the world, we need to abolish the police and police are a danger to Christian Cooper. It's like he wanted more cops. He had been for some time advocating to get more cops, presumably to police the dog walkers so he could watch birds in peace like the freaking little nerd that he is.
Okay, and for Nessa Pearl and the other people who think that this was an act of violence and it was trying to invoke police brutality against a Black man, or somehow feel it was wrong for a woman to call the police on a man who was threatening her, who happens to be Black, do they believe Christian Cooper was trying to murder another Black man when a few months earlier he asked someone to call the cops on Jasper Lawrence, who he was having an altercation with because that Black man had his dog off the leash? Christian Cooper literally asked bystanders to call the police on a Black man
because his dog wasn't on a leash.
Yeah, totally. Well, and because that man
that's like a Karen thing to do.
The Karen thing to do. He was trying to murder him. He was trying to murder the other man, which is, no one's saying that. Christian Cooper has grifted on this. He is making so much money. He has his own, doesn't he have a bird watching show on NPR?
Yeah, he has his own, on National Geographic. He has his own show, which I think launched like this month or something like that. Bird watching show on National Geographic to, try to get Black people more interested in bird watching because they've been excluded from bird watching all of this time and are clearly, very hurt and upset about that. I'd love to hear from any Black person who's felt excluded from bird watching because of racism.
And it's like primarily liberal white people giving him a platform. It's not on the BET network. I don't see a demand for more access to bird watching coming from the masses in general, let alone let alone the African American community. But it's fascinating to me. It's on Nat Geo, which is, it'd be interesting to see what their demographics are, but I would say it's primarily white middle class liberals who appreciate that network.
Yes, he like right away after this happened, he produced and sold a comic book for DC Comics called It's a Bird about, what happened to him. It was the first part of the company's digital anthology series called Represent. So immediate grift.
Yeah.
And then he launched his own TV show for National Geographic called Extraordinary Birder, and now he's published this book and is doing the PR. I should take a cue from this guy. I would be much more rich and successful if, I'd taken the opportunity being kicked off of Twitter when there was all this media attention around me to publish a book and, make millions like some other people did. But unfortunately, we're not all as talented at grifting as he is, I don't know, this behavior to do this to a woman, to like completely destroy her life and then be so happy and proud of yourself that you've managed to create this huge platform for yourself and make all this money off of it and to maintain this narrative is just really sociopathic and gross to me.
No, and especially again, where there is audio footage of him at a city council meeting in New York calling for increased police presence in Central Park, especially in the Ramble where he likes to birdwatch. He wanted more police there.
Oh, it's just too much.
It's too much. It's too much. The hypocrisy is too much. And it's also very distressing to see this messaging to women, white women in particular, that we have to be silent if we're being threatened by men of particular racial demographics. And especially as the support for radical Islam and Hamas is growing in the mainstream and in the left, it's really not going to be good for women to brainwash an entire culture, an entire generation of women to believe that they have to put their own needs second and they have to protect the interests of men of color, even if that means protecting the interests of violent and threatening men.
Yeah, I mean, and this has been going on for some time. I remember arguing with like the anarchists over this situation because, the anarchists were the ones who wanted to abolish the cops and all cops are bastards. And, crime, any kind of crime should be dealt with by the community. Are you the one that shared that clip with me about, or was it someone else, about how, they were going to send social workers to deal with domestic violence incidences, which is so dangerous? That was you, wasn't it?
And that was being called for across the country in liberal communities as a solution to the police brutality problem, is to send social workers instead of police.
And one of the suggestions by these anarchists, who also, by the way, were always in favor of legalizing prostitution, was that, there be some kind of indigenous style healing circle. They're big fans of restorative justice. And every time I was like, okay, so there's no cops because cops are evil. Who are women supposed to call when they're in dangerous situations? Most often situations of domestic violence, but maybe somebody breaks into their house, maybe there's a stranger rape situation, but usually it's going to be you're in your house and your husband or your partner or boyfriend or ex is trying to murder you or is attacking you and you need somebody to help. Who's supposed to call and help? And they're like, the community, i.e. men, because it's not going to be women who are going to be able to save you from a violent man. Sorry. The community of anarchist men who often are abusers themselves. There's lots and lots of, there's just as many domestic abusers in anarchism and leftism as there is anywhere else. Right. And like, what do you what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And these guys, these same people at this time when I was having these arguments, this was sort of before the trans thing really came to a head. These are all the same people who are trans activists and who are supporting all these men saying kill TERFs. These are the men I'm supposed to call to protect me from a violent man.
Right. Exactly.
But often there was the, like a race element to all of this too. Like, oh, well, and feminists would make these arguments too if they were left enough. Where, well, you have to think about, if it's an Indigenous man and you're calling the cops, this is in a Canadian context, right? So we don't have very many Black people. We have more Indigenous people than we have Black people in BC and Vancouver specifically. Like there's a history of, marginalization, police brutality, racism. I don't know that any of this is true on the parts of the cops, but maybe it is of, going after Indigenous men. So, calling the cops on an Indigenous man, if he's your domestic abuser or rapist or whatever, is, you shouldn't do that because of racism. Like that kind of narrative is happening from women, from other women, right?
Right. And I know of multiple stories of women who were raped by Black men who did not go to the cops and were encouraged by their communities not to go to the cops because it would contribute to violence against Black men and be harmful to the Black community and be racist. It's a real lose-lose situation for women. And I don't hold the cops up on this pedestal. I do know plenty of cops who I think are good people, but I know that police are more likely to be domestic abusers than any other professions. Police and soldiers are much more likely to abuse the women in their lives than most other professions. Here in Albuquerque, we had a case of a cop who was a serial rapist and was raping women when he was picking them up, for violations. White, Hispanic, and Native American women. We don't have a large African American population here. I don't think any of his victims were Black. And it took many, many women coming forward before this guy got caught. I think the LA Strangler, there was a case of a serial killer in LA. And for a while, they were pretty sure it was a police officer. And they were telling the women, like, if a cop is trying to pull you over, don't do it, just drive home. So for like 3 weeks, women were allowed to speed and do whatever they want. So it's not like the cops are always good men, but we need some system to protect us, and we need some recourse when the men in our community are harming us. And it's really, really dangerous for women to be told there's a certain class of men who can threaten you with violence, and you cannot call the police or you will be punished.
I mean, I'm not going to argue that all cops are good people, because cops are people. So there's going to be good cops and bad cops because they're human beings. But yeah, I mean, I've had to call the cops on men in situations of domestic violence, and I'm grateful that I had somebody to call, and usually had positive experiences with those cops, except in the cases where they didn't really take me seriously and didn't follow up and didn't really seem to care all that much. It wasn't that I felt threatened by the cops. It's that they sort of thought that I was being silly and, said that they would follow up with my abuser and then didn't, and, didn't really do their jobs. In other cases, they did their jobs as best as they were able. I mean, the thing about calling the cops in situations of abuse is that you have to, if you want to be taken seriously in the future, like if you want to get a restraining order, like if you want the cops to actually do anything about your abuser, if they won't leave you alone, there has to be sort of a record of abuse, and that, that you've had to call the cops and all of that. I don't, people just, so many people just really don't seem to get what a big threat men are to women, and how scary it can be, and that there's not really anything that you can do. Like the community can only do so much. And sometimes the community can be helpful if they ostracize somebody or kick them out or, go after them. And sometimes you tell people and they really don't care and they try to blame you or they think of it as gossip or something. It's not a perfect system. That's not what anybody is arguing, but there needs to be some system and women need to have these options. And I think it's insane to try to frame women as racist or as attempting to have somebody murdered. Like, why would a cop murder Christian Cooper? He doesn't have a gun. Like, the times that these murders usually happen is because somebody has a gun and the cops are worried about getting shot.
Not only does he not have a gun, he's an upper middle class, well-educated professional Black man who is not likely to get into an altercation with the police. He is so low risk for police brutality. And then I'm just gonna say, for the sake of devil's advocate, that maybe Amy Cooper was using racism to her advantages, or trying to use whatever leverage she had, which as a woman being threatened in the woods. And maybe she was being threatening by saying, I'm going to call the cops and say an African-American man is threatening me. Why is that less acceptable than a man in a culture where women are raped every goddamn day
and murdered by their husbands and ex-husbands and boyfriends and ex-boyfriends literally every single day in North America?
And by strangers as
well. Not exaggerating.
Often after they're raped, which is like, women can't, there's something about male sexuality that is will never be comprehensible to me, which is how a man can like get off on having sex with a woman he's going to kill, like this happens all the time. Women are raped and murdered every day. And okay, if that's the leverage she had when she legitimately was being threatened by a man in a place where she had no other recourse, okay, so she pulled that to try to have some leverage in the situation. Why do we think it's okay for him to behave in a way that's threatening to women and he gets rewarded for it, where even if she did behave in a way that was threatening to Black men, she's absolutely destroyed by it. At the least, it's like, okay, they both were exhibiting problems with our culture, but nobody, this is just crazy that he's lionized when he knows what it means to women to say, I'm going to do what I want and you're not going to like it. He knows. And if he doesn't know, he's an absolute idiot who knows no women and who hates women and doesn't listen to women. I think every good man knows how a woman would respond to a threatening stranger saying that to her in the woods.
Well, he's gay. He's like an LGBTQ activist also. So he maybe doesn't know very many women. I mean, he has a sister though. His sister is the one that put the video on Twitter in the first place and caused it to go viral. So I don't know. I mean, misogyny is like just rebranded itself. I don't like to use those words, but it's just like everywhere the attempts to blame women for every single little thing when, it's not their fault. Like, women are not a major threat to men. Sorry. Like, yes, I understand that women can be crazy and that women can lie and women can try to destroy men's lives in social ways. That totally happens. We saw that happen during Me Too. But they're not a physical threat. And, you can't frame calling the cops on a man as some kind of threat to them if that man is threatening to you. And it's just not true that in North America, the cops are just going to instantly kill a Black man for no reason because somebody called the cops on him, regardless of context.
Exactly. And again, Roland Fryer's work was very clear that Black men are actually not more likely to be killed by the cops in the United States than any other group of men. So it's based on a huge cultural myth to begin with. Yeah, it's Yeah, and I'm not sure she was being racist. She's Canadian. She doesn't come from the same background as Americans of, living in a country with just a few generations out from chattel slavery and Jim Crow and lynchings. Like she's not coming from that background. She'd only lived in New York for less than a decade.
No, she's from Canada.
Right, exactly. So
she didn't know who Emmett Till was.
No, she didn't. She doesn't come from the same cultural background. And I don't think it's provable at all that she was coming from a place of racism when she was describing him. But I can see that people project that onto her as though they know her intentions. And even if that's true, I don't think that trumps his behavior of being threatening and his history of threatening other people. And there were 3 people who came forward who were willing to talk to the reporter on the Honestly podcast. But the 2 who were white refused to give their names because they were afraid of this happening to them. Mm-hmm. The two white other victims of Christian Cooper's menacing behavior were terrified to give their names. The Black victim of Christian Cooper's menacing behavior was willing to give his name. And he said, I know that the reason the other 2 people won't come forward is because they're white. This guy had a history of threatening people in the Ramble and threatening their dogs and making, offering to feed your dog something looks like a threat of trying to kill your dog.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even if she were racist, which I don't think there's any evidence of, I just don't see how that's a worse crime than threatening to hurt a woman or an animal. Right. Like her having a racist thought inside of her head isn't an actual threat, even though that thought might be a bad thought.
Right. Right. And it's not the Jim Crow era. A white woman can't get the cops to kill a Black man. It's a different time. And maybe that history, like her history of being raped by a stranger as a young woman, was informing his interpretation of it and the cultural interpretation of it. But at the bare bones of this, it's a large man saying to a woman alone in the woods who's unarmed, I'm going to do what I want and you're not going to like it.
Sorry, I keep getting distracted because Matt in the comments keeps saying, I get this a lot, that people assume that I'm a lesbian. Because he was like, Megan was in a domestic violence situation. I thought she was into women. No, I'm not into women. I'm heterosexual and I've been in lots of relationships with men. And unfortunately, some of those relationships have been abusive. I think that probably most women who've been in relationships with men have experienced some form of abuse. And it's not uncommon. So people seem to act shocked and appalled about that reality, but it's really not very shocking. For those who are just kind of tuning in and maybe missed the beginning, this is where all the women, I'm speaking with Mary Lou Singleton, who is on Substack at Mary Lou Singleton, and her website is enchantedfamilymedicine.com, and those noises are the wind.
Yes.
There's a very, very strong wind in New Mexico, and it's bashing things around on Mary Lou's roof. What do you think about the likes disappearing on Twitter? I think it's kind of awesome.
Is it awesome?
At first I didn't like it, and then I decided I did like it.
I don't like it. I don't have strong feelings about it, but I enjoy seeing who liked something. And I don't know why I got some kind of dopamine hit out of that. Not just on my own comments. I'm not super active on Twitter. I don't get a lot of engagement, but I enjoyed looking at the list of who had liked it. And now I no longer have that small pleasure, but I don't feel very, very strongly about it. Why do you like it? Why do you think it's a good thing?
Well, because I just think people are freer to like the things that they like, which I think is a good thing. Because I think that a lot of people, for good reason, were scared to like things because their likes were policed. I'm not policing other people's likes, so I was like, whatever. Why do we have to hide likes? You can still see your own likes, like you can see who's liked your own tweets. You just can't see what other people liked. And I never really spent much time paying
Right.
attention to what other people like. At first I didn't like it because I thought, oh, now what people like isn't going to show up in my feed. And I liked that aspect of seeing what other people like because it brought other tweets and information or jokes or whatever to my attention. So that part I liked. But yeah, I think that it's just going to create a more true and legitimate representation of what people actually like, essentially, because they're not terrified of being fired from their jobs or mobbed or like having some kind of like media report about them because they liked a turfy tweet, which is what happened to J.K. Rowling initially, which, I think that piqued her in the end. But at first, her publicist had to issue this statement saying that she had sort of an elderly moment or something like that and accidentally liked Magdalene Burns' tweet when she was really just trying to save it.
Yeah, I forgot about that embarrassing episode. I have really forgiven and forgot that because I really do like J.K. Rowling.
That was just, I'm sure that was what her PR people told her to do. I seriously doubt that was her idea. I think her PR people probably freaked out and were like, okay, we got it. We're just going to say that it was a mistake and you just don't really know how the technology works. Sorry. And then she just decided, fuck this. I'm going full turf.
Right. I'm thinking of Magdalene Burns, another childless woman who was calling out the trans insanity long before Jordan Peterson entered the scene.
She was amazing. Her videos were amazing, and she was so brave and bold and funny and awesome.
So funny.
Yes.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Magdalene Burns. Mm-hmm. It's completely unfair that she's no longer with us, but I'm certain that she's watching all this very bemused from heaven.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But yeah, I think that it's generally a good thing that likes can't be tracked anymore. I did read a hilarious article in the CBC about the CBC was very concerned about the likes disappearing because they can't police people's thoughts anymore.
Seriously?
God, this was the worst. This article was so stupid. So this again is the CBC, Canada's main media outlet, national broadcaster, public broadcaster. And their article that they wrote about Elon making likes private said, public likes on the social media platform were always a double-edged sword. They established a public record of every user's interests and interactions, but they were also an occasional source of trouble for politicians, celebrities, and even site owner Elon Musk, whose likes were frequently examined by journalists and the public. And they quoted Liam McLaughlin, a communication and media lecturer at the University of Liverpool, who said, likes were this really important and interesting way to understand the types of content those in power, as if they were only policing the likes of people in power. Give me a break. Those in power really consume and agree with, and then says, removing this content is a poor move for democracy, some might argue.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah. And then, they reference two examples of politicians' likes being tracked in completely uninteresting and irrelevant ways. CNN reporters discovered that Senator J.D. Vance, a top candidate to run as Donald Trump's vice president, liked tweets in 2016 and 2017 that were highly critical of the former president, underlining his pivot from critic to close ally. Like, who cares? So he changed his mind, whatever, or he changed his career strategy. I don't know, but literally, who cares?
Wait, and they could only determine that from his likes on Twitter. Not
I'm sure
that he was writing op-eds that were critical of Trump at the time.
I know. Okay. I know. Like, they couldn't even find any good examples of this.
Wow.
And then they go on to say, this was my favorite part. there's a section in this article that is titled "Some May Benefit from the Hiding of Likes." So, Samantha Cole, journalist and co-founder of a technology news site called 404 Media, which I've never heard of before, noted that some communities might see a benefit from private likes, for example, adult performers. So this might help porn companies. She says sex workers have a really hard time with being hidden by algorithms. No, they don't. They're promoted by algorithms. But okay, let's pretend.
That's why people are putting the phrase pussy in bio.
Constantly, and why porn is being shoved into our DMs and our algorithms and the DMs of minors constantly, because sex workers are having a really hard time with being hidden by algorithms. And maybe this means that they'll get a boost if more people are freely liking their content. This Samantha Cole person also hosted a CBC podcast focusing on Pornhub. So she's a shill for Pornhub, I guess.
Yeah.
But essentially what she's saying, she's being manipulative, of course, in her quotes, and so is the CBC. But, this is good for porn companies because now more people won't feel embarrassed to like pornography on Twitter. As far as I'm concerned, porn should be banned on Twitter. I don't know why it's there. This is not a porn site. People know where to go if they're looking for pornography. They don't need to see it on Twitter. I don't want to see it on Twitter. I'm sick of being harassed by porn bots on Twitter. But yeah, this will be good for the porn companies who are trying to push their porn stars on Twitter, because maybe it'll push them into the algorithm even more than they already are. So thanks for that, helpful framing, the CBC. Bad for democracy, good for Pornhub.
Has anyone been denied a dissertation committee or tenure or job for liking Pornhub? I haven't heard of that, where Pornhub is well known for making money off the filmed rape of children, of teenage girls being raped, and then they find that men are jerking out, are watching this on Pornhub, and Pornhub's making money off of it. They have been sued for that multiple times. And no one's ever, as far as I know, no one's lost their job for or been publicly shamed for liking anything on Pornhub. That's a fascinating take, because as far as I know, people aren't being punished for liking pornographic tweets.
Every once in a while, I think somebody's mocked for liking pornographic tweets, but I don't think that that's had any serious impact on anybody.
Yeah. No, I don't think anyone's actually.
I don't think anyone's come out. I don't think anyone's been canceled for liking pornographic tweets, whereas people have been canceled, or they've attempted to cancel them for liking turfy tweets or so-called racist tweets or so on and so forth, non-woke tweets.
Liking the Republican presidential candidate.
Right.
That's really, really crazy. So are you invested enough in American politics that you have any preference or opinion on who Donald Trump should pick as a vice presidential candidate, or who you would like him to pick?
No, I'm not, but I like JD Vance.
You do? I like JD Vance.
His book was really good.
Yeah, and I actually also grew up in an Armco town like JD Vance, and I have such a similar background of with white working class ruin that happened when the steel industry collapsed, and I learned a lot about the history of Armco towns. Like, I literally grew up in an Armco town, and I didn't know the history of that steel company created these towns to bring in the town I grew up in, it was to bring in immigrants to work in the steel mills. The one he grew up in, it was to bring in the descendants of the Scots-Irish in Appalachia to work in the steel mills. I do think he's been a voice for the working class. I like his history. I don't like his position on abortion. I would prefer Donald Trump pick Tulsi Gabbard, obviously. I think that would be pretty amazing. And she has said she wouldn't rule out saying yes to that. I think that would be incredible.
So awesome. I don't know. Do you think she could tolerate that position? I think that would be quite challenging, but maybe not. Maybe I'm underestimating Trump's ability to not act like an egomaniac.
Yeah. I think Tulsi Gabbard is a very steady person, and that she's got that military temperament, which JD Vance also has. Like if you can put up with being in the military, you can put up with a lot of bullshit and a lot of things you disagree with. That's part of the job of being a soldier. And she's got war experience, she's got leadership experience, she's got congressional experience. I think she's a great candidate.
I mean, Tulsi as VP would be like a dream.
Yeah,
personally,
I think it would be
thrilling.
incredible. Yeah. And I honestly think it'd be the smartest thing Trump could do, because picking a conservative, no abortion ever white man is not going to go over well.
Yeah. Oh, it'll be such a real conundrum and challenge for the progressive media to paint Tulsi Gabbard as some like white, hyper right-wing, racist, anti-woman, misogynist, danger to democracy kind of person. If
Tulsi Gabbard, if he's picked a woman of color as his...
She's so clearly pro-democracy and pro-America, and she's a woman of color, and she's all about, I think she's very wise in terms of, I think that she is empowering for women.
Absolutely. And she's really speaking out against the threat of transgender ideology and the gender legislation, the women's rights. She's incredibly charismatic. As Konstantin Kizin very clearly pointed out, she's sexy, and then when he commended her for her performance of femininity.
What did he say?
He said,
I didn't hear this.
It made me so angry, especially given the fact that they platformed Brianna Wu the next week. He said he's concerned about the gender wars. And he said, Tulsi, you're someone who commands respect and yet still manages to remain very feminine. And she was a bit taken aback. And he said, what advice would you give to women and men? And she said, tell people to just be themselves. Like she deflected it. She was not wearing a sundress. When she was on Rogan,
Can you imagine a sundress? A sundress does not command respect. It does not.
How is Tulsi Gabbard feminine other than being pretty? I mean, she's a very, very
she's attractive, and she obviously takes care of her appearance. And I think in terms of her commitment to family and her kids and things like that, maybe that signals femininity.
I think.
I don't know. I'd have to listen. I don't know what the context was or what was meant by that.
Pretty upset because he didn't commend Brianna Wu on his performance of femininity, and he's working a lot harder.
I think he failed is why.
He's really working at it. He is working so hard on his performance of femininity, much harder than Tulsi Gabbard, who's going on Rogan talking about ice baths and Krav Maga and her hard workouts. And she, literally is trained to kill you with her bare hands. She's a military commander. Like this is, it just upset me that was what she was reduced to. But it did point out that men find her sexy. And as Rush Limbaugh said, men won't listen to a woman unless it's a fertile female, which is why they were excited about Sarah Palin. Tulsi Gabbard is so much more qualified to be the vice president than Sarah Palin was.
Do you think that's true, that men won't listen to a woman unless she's a fertile female?
Some men say that. The Dalai Lama said that if the next...
let's think about people that men listen to. Sorry, women that men listen to. Men listen to me. I have more men in my audience than women do.
You're a fertile female.
Okay. Then never
So yes, okay, one in that column.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think about this more. I don't want to keep people watching me while I think right now about non-fertile women that men listen to. But
men like what's her name, Alex Kashuda. Men really like.
I think
her.
They like Camille Paglia, don't they?
I like Camille Paglia more and more all the time. I want to go back and reread Sexual Personae and some of the stuff.
I refound that book in my old books, and I brought it with me to BC when I was there recently with the intent of reading it, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But I would like to this summer, fall, read that also.
It's weighty. It's weighty, but tell me what you think. It's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, some men like Camille Paglia. Men like Louise Perry. They really like her.
Don't men like Roseanne Barr? Or is that just me? A man.
I think a lot of men really hated Roseanne Barr. They hated it when she was popular.
Yeah,
a lot
okay,
of men,
you're right.
not all. Yeah. Who knows? We should look and see. But yeah, the Dalai Lama has told us that, and he is the incarnation of God. And he said that there could be a female Dalai Lama, but she would have to be very attractive because otherwise, what's the point? Yeah, that was disappointing.
The third time I've spat all over my laptop and mic in this conversation.
So far we have Rush Limbaugh and the Dalai Lama saying it out loud.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Anyway.
Well, thank God we have this stream because otherwise nobody would listen to us.
Right.
Everyone be sure to tune in every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern to listen to all the women talking. It's nobody else is interested apparently. For anyone who's wondering, my Team Turf shirt is on my shop at Fourth Wall, which I posted the link in the show notes on YouTube and in the live chat on YouTube, or you can go to meganmurphy.ca, which is my Substack, and click the shop button. I recently wrote a very long essay that actually has been getting some really, really amazing comments, which I'm glad about because I was like, this essay is too long, first of all, and perhaps a little discombobulated because, again, I started off talking about this accusation of, childless women being at fault for embracing trans activism and Hamas, and then turned it into a rant about why I hate sundresses. But people seemed into it, so you can read that essay on my Substack.
If you had to live in a culture that dictated female garb and what we're allowed to wear, would you pick the one where it was the full burqa or the sundress?
Sundress.
Yeah, me too. I wouldn't like it though. I'd be grouchy.
Sure.
But
I wouldn't want to wear that many heavy clothes all the time. I wear dresses and skirts all the time. Like I'll wear, I look grubby and grody and like a boy or like some kind of like hobo and lesbian quite often. But I also wear like tight, like sexy clothes in Sayulita, partly because it's like hot and you can, and everybody's just kind of sexy. So nobody really, like if I wore like some of the things that I wear here, I would never wear in Vancouver because I would feel stared at and I would feel like I was sticking out. But here, I mean, so many people are wearing like not very many clothes that it's not that noticeable. I just find sundresses kind of like cheesy and girlish and not all that flattering. And I find them like a bit tacky. So, but I wear skirts all the time over here. I just kind of wear them with like, Doc Martens.
Right.
I mean, which I guess you could wear Doc Martens with sundresses. Like if you think about like 90s sundresses.
Right. Well, I really enjoyed
some good options.
Yeah, I liked sundresses in the 90s. I felt they were comfortable and roomy.
Yeah, in high school, I liked sundresses.
Yeah, I was in college at the time. I liked the pockets. I was into, I was kind of a hippie. I liked dancing in a flowy dress. That was nice. It felt free. But I never really thought it was performing for the male gaze. I went to a college where like none of the women wore makeup and weren't really, I mean, a lot of us were shaving our heads and stuff. And it, we got plenty of male attention because, we were young and at college and we were all having a lot of sex.
And because men like women.
Yeah, exactly. We were female.
Regardless of, for the most part, their fashion.
Yeah. Well, and I think things were different. I always remember Heather Hying saying when we talked with her that young people were a lot more beautiful in the recent past, that just there were pheromones flowing and people were at the height of their physical beauty, and people were healthy and tanned and eating real food and exercising. So maybe it didn't matter so much what you wore.
Well, I think people maybe looked. Do you think people looked younger then? I feel like a lot of the women, like if you look at somebody like the younger Kardashians, I'm totally forgetting their names now, but I think the youngest one, Bruce's child, one of the Jenner, not Kendall, but the other one. I can't believe I'm forgetting this. Anyway, she's quite young. Like she's like, I think in her early 20s, but she looks like she's about 35 because she's wearing so much makeup and she has so many fillers and stuff in her face and she's gotten so much work done.
Right.
So I think like there's always all these videos that show up in my Instagram feed that were like me at 14 in, 1994 and now girls at 14 and they look like sexy adult women, whereas when we were 14 we looked like little stupid skinny scrawny teenagers. But like I'm wondering if maybe there was a more youthful look because we act like we look natural. Like it wasn't there, we didn't wear tons of makeup in high school either. Like there was sort of makeup trends like the Toast of New York and Twig, like that sort of like brownie lipstick, but I wasn't wearing a ton of like foundation. There was no such thing as contouring. I was not paying attention to my eyebrows at all. I wasn't wearing there wasn't all this trying to contort your face into something that it wasn't, which so I mean I can't imagine that if you're attracted to women, I doubt you want to look at a face full of tons of makeup. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Well, it's so
like if you're already young looking and you have beautiful skin and you just look attractive because you're like a young fertile woman.
Yeah, well, how much of it is culturally conditioned? I think of how men in China were aroused into frenzies at the sight of bound feet because that was what they had been told was sexy, and it's so disgusting. So I don't know what young people, I don't know. To me, it looks like everyone's messed up and their endocrine systems are a mess and they aren't as beautiful as they used to be because they're much more likely to be really overweight or to have endocrine problems or to be wearing all this makeup or have done weird things to their faces. But they're also
poor bone structure, like poor facial structure, because they're not eating enough meat. They're not chewing enough.
They're not chewing enough
chops and beef and things like that. They're not chewing on steaks enough.
Right. And they're in front of screens all the time and they're all like they have poor posture and they never get out in the sun. So it's so rare to see really well-toned, fit, tan young people anymore. It's shocking. When I see beautiful young people, I kind of gasp because I'm so used to seeing a lot of really sick. I mean, it really is. They're physically sick. But that's the norm in the United States now.
That's an interesting observance. I just realized we forgot to talk about Freddie deBoer. I don't need to say his last name. I don't know if you guys can read my essay response to him again on my Substack at meganmurphy.ca. I don't know if we need to rehash it. I just couldn't believe. I think he's just playing dumb on the trans thing. I don't think he genuinely doesn't get it. I think maybe he has like a trans woman boyfriend or family member or something like that, and so he can't really be honest about the subject. I hate his writing. I've never been able to get through anything. I keep trying to go back to it because all these people follow him and seem to think that he's this great writer and thinker, but I'm like, his paragraphs are like a page long and I don't think his essays are very readable. And then when I read his arguments around trans stuff, he just has no good arguments and either doesn't get it or pretends that he doesn't get it. So I'm not sure how am I supposed to respect somebody or take them seriously if they pretend to not understand what we're talking about, which is men and women's spaces. And, this is not about trans rights or a so-called trans person. This is about women and girls' safety and kids. Like there's no separate category of transgenderism, and he pretends like he doesn't understand that. And then whenever he writes on trans, shuts off the comments so people can't engage with his arguments.
But only on that topic, right? He has the comments open on the other the other things he writes
This is
about?
what people tell me. I don't pay enough attention to know, but he did have the comments off on this one. And the last thing that I read of his on transgenderism, and people say he always turns the comments off on the articles that he writes about trans.
Like Jordan Peterson, isn't he pretty upfront about having a psychotic disorder and being on a ton of psych meds?
Yeah, he has a lot of mental illness stuff.
Yeah.
And he's on antidepressants and stuff, I think.
I think he's on antipsychotics as well as antidepressants.
Okay.
He has a psychotic disorder, and that, I think that's interesting. I just think it's interesting that that might be impeding his ability to really think it through, and he's actively taking central nervous system depressants to keep himself from being psychotic every day. But anyway, that's probably neither here nor there. I also find his writing to be much less incisive than it's held up to be. I think he's boring. I think he rambles. I don't like the way he puts sentences together. And I certainly don't like it that he's telling us we have to support trans people when no, we don't. We absolutely don't have to support transgenderism. We have a right to say, I think that's a sexist ideology that's causing a lot of problems for women in our society.
Yeah. I mean, what he was trying to say was, he was like, people often start out this, conversation about, when they're criticizing transgenderism or trans activism or whatever by saying, I support trans rights, but, and then launch into all these criticisms of trans people and transgenderism. And I just wanted to be like, no, I'm not saying that I don't support trans rights. There's no such thing as trans right. What is a trans right? That's not a thing that exists. Men and women have the same rights regardless of whether or not they identify as trans. I don't care if you identify as trans. That's not a real thing. It doesn't mean anything. You don't get special privileges because you don't like gender roles. I don't like them either.
Right. Totally. I liked your callback to him. He didn't respond. He probably just ignored you.
No, I didn't expect him to respond. But the essay went over well, so it seems that a lot of other people have the same frustrations with him that I do.
Right. Okay, I'm getting told, and I need to examine this. Diminishing someone's opinion because they have a psychotic condition is ableism. I'm not so much diminishing his opinion. I'm saying that possibly one of the reasons he's not a clear communicator is because he's taking drugs that are very suppressive to your intellectual functioning, and that I don't understand why he's so elevated as someone who's so brilliant, when honestly the most brilliant things I've seen him talk about are his warnings to society about the manufacturing of mental illness coming from his own perspective. I think that's where he shines when he's discussing the mental health industry and the manufacturing of more mental illness in our youth. I just don't think he's a very clear communicator, and I don't think that he's a great writer, and I'm not sure why he's elevated the way he is.
Yeah, no, I've always been confused about that too. I don't think he's a great writer either. And I'd never really, it's like a struggle for me to get through anything that he writes and understand what he's saying. I have to really, really focus, and usually I get bored before I can get through anything. So
Right. All right.
Okay. Well, I hope that this windstorm doesn't knock over anything too serious over there. Thank you for joining us. You sound great. Your mic sounds great.
Do you hear that? It's getting so much louder.
Oh, it's getting worse.
It's getting worse. I have to go out into it. So hopefully I won't get hit by a garbage can or.
Okay, well, be careful out there in the world.
Thanks.
And yeah, everyone who's watching, please like and subscribe to support the channel, and tune in next Wednesday. I can't think of anything else to say. Am I forgetting anything?
No, I think we're good. We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye everyone. Have a good night. Thank you for tuning in.